Hey there. When I was a little kid, I used to really wonder what it is that elders knew. And you'd often hear them say things like, when I was young, I wish I had. And I developed this interest in knowing the things that they know. And one of the things that I learned much too young was that I was going to die. I think that came along with some bullying and just feeling pretty miserable. One of the things that really helped me was understanding existential philosophy and learning to take responsibility for my life and to have some honesty about the fact that I was going to die and to really look at my life and say, okay, what do I want to make out of this life instead of accidentally just kind of letting it happen to me. And I remember having that epiphany. I think it was maybe 21 or 22. I was at an Eaton Park. I was sitting reading a book by Soren Kierkegaard, and it just occurred to me, if I want a good life, it's up to me to do it. And ever since then, this topic has always been kind of to the top of my mind. Now, for most people, it's not, and for a very good reason. And there are many days that I lament the fact that I couldn't live the easier life, right? But that wasn't the hand I was dealt, and so now I make the most of it. So here's a story I want to talk about today. It's difficult. I encourage you to get a cup of coffee and sit back and relax. Um, Take this conversation when you have a clear mind because it's kind of nuanced and it's easy to miss the point. And if you catch the point, you'll think to yourself probably something like, "Wow, I've always known this to be true, and I haven't had these words before." So that's where the profundity is. Okay, so we're going to talk about death anxiety, and we're going to talk about it starting from the place of disgust. So now, you can imagine having something like a cold sore, or like the folks who have monkeypox right now, or you imagine having like some sort of parasite living in your skin, or I remember having flesh-eating bacteria in my feet, or you imagine like a scabies, right, the maggot burrowing in your skin, surviving. Now, it's easy to feel disgust with that, and in fact, you should, and that's our natural drive, trying to protect us from dangerous things that aren't good. Okay, so the emotion disgust is meant to tell us about dangerousness in the environment to protect us. Now, something interesting happens with it. If you imagine like a prankster, a shankster, whatever, taking advantage of an old lady and telling her like, "Hey, I got this miracle drug and it'll make you 20 again or something," right? And he's taking advantage of her advanced years. Like there's a type of moral disgust that we hold, and it's known that the brain, the same part of the brain that gives us disgust to think about eating rotten apples with worms and maggots in it, is the same part that fires up when we think about the person taking advantage of the old lady. Now, it's part of our humanity to believe that we are safe from all these random things that happen in the world, right? A belief that we shouldn't be the one infected with scabies and maggots and things. Um, and we get upset at people who take advantage of old ladies. Now, the problem with that is we're all chronically ill with death, and we all know that. We all know that our time will come, but we don't live as if that's true. I want to remind you of 9/11, right? What happened? People are going about their life, and all of a sudden, an airplane runs into a building, thousands of people die. There's no obvious reason, at least not in the moment, right? You can look at all the anthropological and historical studies and find out why there's issues between Muslims in the United States. But in the time, right, why those people? Why at that place? And there really wasn't one. And what happened is people worked really hard to try to come up with a reason. They worked really hard to come up with a sense of safety. And we look back and there's lots of foolishness that happened. Okay. There's a book by Ernest Becker named The Denial of Death. It's probably the single most important book I've ever read in my life, and it made sense of things that I struggled with for much of my life. And here's the idea. So he talks about the nature of death anxiety and our human consciousness. And he starts from Sigmund Freud and psychoanalysis and the role of the unconscious in life. And essentially, Ernest Becker puts out the idea that our unconscious mind protects us from worrying about death. And I think if you look around, you can see that's plainly true. Now, what are the effects of this? Perhaps the most important line from the book is that we have the body of worms and the mind of God. And the idea with this is that our body is so feeble, it's so corruptible, it's so limited, where our minds can live in this place of infinity, really. We can imagine what it's like to live forever. We can imagine what it's like to see everywhere. We split the atom, right? We have a sense of almost endless hopefulness. But our body, we were born between feces and urine. We were born because our parents had an instinctual act to mate and reproduce. We were born and survived because our mother destroyed things so she could survive, and now I ate some chicken eggs. I destroyed chickens today in order to survive, and a cow yesterday. And this is our nature. The animal part of us is disgusted by the brutality of our existence. How many times have you seen children not really understand that fluffy cow ends up being their hamburger later that day? We divorce the idea, right, that we are killing things to survive. The idea here is that our bodies are paralyzed by the breadth of our existence, by how much we can do. It is paralyzed by the potential that lives within us. The mind of God abhors our bodies and is disgusted by our bodies, right? The limitations that our body puts on our mind. Now, the simple fact is this: we are both, and we have to find out a way to live in a type of balance. So, when things like parasites and scabies and maggots come into our world, there's a disgust. The mind of God cannot be destroyed like that. It can't have those effects. And what happens is it will push them away. Now, after Ernest Becker, there's this idea in psychology that this depth psychologies like psychoanalysis and existential psychology aren't things that are empirically researchable. And in fact, it is. There's a series of psychologists who studied this phenomena in human existence, and it now goes under the theory of terror management theory. And they're able to use it to look at how different groups of people respond to different stimuli. And typically what happens is when a person is essentially encounters death in their everyday life, they call it a mortality salience. When a person approaches death in life, they will retreat back to whatever comforts them. So some people will, go back to church. Others will be more involved in the sports team. Some people go back to their family, right? And this is human nature. And you can see how much anxiety this creates within us. It is natural for our bodies and our minds to want to put away this awareness of death and to get back to the status quo. And it is clearly important that we're able to do this because our ability not to think about death all the time is what allows us to actually grow and prosper as a species. Unfortunately, if it's completely divorced from our everyday reality, we don't take our life seriously. And we get preoccupied with the minutiae and bullshit of everyday life. So instead, it brings us to this question: how much should we actually intentionally focus on death? Now, as you know, I'm inclined to look at the tension in things and try to find the correct balance. And here's what I say. There's two theories on this: Ernest Becker's theory, and then there's a separate one by Irvin Yalom in his book on existential psychotherapy. And they have two different outcomes. And so the first one was Becker, so I'll give his first. Becker said at the very end of his book, so if you don't want to hear the spoiling, don't listen. He says that we get the whole way through, the person becomes aware of death, and they do their work, and they look deeper and deeper and deeper. They get rid of this social anxiety, they get rid of that neurotic symptom, they get rid of this fear of heights, it goes on. And as sooner or later, they get rid of every single neurotic and psychotic symptom that they have. And they can see reality in just full brute force. And what are they left with? Simply the awareness they're going to die. And is that awareness actually better than ignorance? Ernest Becker would say no. Now, Irvin Yalom would say, well, hear me out. And this is what he says. He says that when we have a mortality salience, and he would call it a boundary experience, the gist of which is you recognize the end of what it means to be human. Our aunt dies, 9/11 happens, and you have to look death directly in the face. The instinct is to put it away. Now, Irvin Yalom says is it is an opportunity to take life seriously. And he looked at folks who were diagnosed with being terminally ill with cancer and looked at how they lived their lives and their satisfaction with life. And he realized that people who were terminally ill with cancer and recognized that they got 2 months, 6 months, a year to live, ended up having a higher quality of psychological life after they knew they were going to die because they put their life in order. They valued the things that were important to them, and they stopped valuing the things that other people cared about. And so, coming here, having wrestled with that question, when do you kind of broach this death anxiety question? I link her with the idea that if you have a mortality salience or a boundary experience, use it. Don't put it away. If you have too much stress, let it go, right? If there's too many other things going on, it's not the time. But if it happens, like if you end up finding out that you have, say, like scabies or I don't know, or you had coronavirus and you're about to die, take that as the opportunity to put your life in order, right? Have a sense of balance. Recognize that you are both the worm and God, and love both. Love both of those parts of the people around you. And then at that point, the life that you have will be that much more meaningful. So thank you for taking this time, and best wishes.